everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix. And it's December. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, baby.
I'm here, Dr. Martin, with James Junkin. He's obviously in the Christmas spirit. We're moving towards the holidays for whatever you celebrate. James celebrates the University of Alabama, so everything Crimson Tide. So welcome, and as you guys know, we are powered by Veriforce. Thank you, Veriforce, for giving us this platform to talk about risk and in all of its forms and safety and etc. Today, we're going to talk about a recent incident, tragic incident in the workplace. In fact, a homicide. And while it's a little bit depressing, we want to get some information out there about what we can do in our workplaces to make them safer, to pre-plan for events like this and things like that. Before we do, James, we got a rip from the headline, just hot off the presses from the NTSB.
Last March, I was near Baltimore when this incident occurred. Very famous incident, kind of falling off the headlines, but it's back in the headlines. We all remember when the massive container ship Dally struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge there in Baltimore. Several people were killed. The bridge collapsed, which is something that you don't normally see every day happening around the world. And it's kind of surprising it doesn't happen more often, really, when you think about it. As container ships are getting bigger, and trade is really increased globally. A lot of products that you'd be surprised move back and forth over the open oceans. Did some research this past week on this particular topic. Found out that ships at sea, about 3 ships at sea, sink every week. I didn't realize that. But
Hmm.
related specifically to this container ship Dally, the National Transportation Safety Board released its findings of the incident. And I really enjoy reading the National Transportation Safety Board, the Chemical Safety Board, with their incident investigations. They're very, very detailed. And really what this came back to was the ship lost power. It experienced two electrical blackouts while departing Baltimore's harbor heading out to sea. And both of those blackouts resulted from, a loose signal wire that was in the high voltage switchboard. And that caused cascading failures and things like
One
propulsion.
signal wire.
And yeah, one wire, a loose signal wire, um, caused all these power outages. And then that lack of redundancy in their system, they were unable to recover from it and drifted into the bridge. So I think the takeaway from that, since not a lot of our listeners are related directly to the maritime industry, I think the takeaway is organizational practices, right? Organizational practices where you don't have redundancy. In the military, we used to say if you have one, you have none. So, as you're looking at your safety management system and you want to build defenses in depth, if a single point of failure can result in catastrophe, you need to look at building redundancy in your safety management system. And that was my takeaway, sort of stripped from the headlines. I got an article a little bit about that out on my LinkedIn page. So if you head over to my LinkedIn page, you can check out that article that I published. I think it was before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and tie that back to safety a little bit, James. We've talked on previous shows about HAZOPs and why we do HAZOPs and why we look at different parts of a system in system safety or just in any system, things that we're building, mechanical plants, etc. Right? It's because you don't want a single point of failure or a failure that could be catastrophic. If you can build in a redundancy, as James was saying, you want to build that in, right? And that's why people get together and they talk from all different points of view. What can happen if, right?
What if?
Um,
What if? What if?
What
I've
if?
cautioned all my consultants that are in the field every day be asking, "What if?" Now, we can't reduce risk to 0, but we can do a lot better job than we're doing in hazard identification. Somebody polled me here recently, asked, "What is the single biggest improvement you can make in 2026?" And I said,
Mhm.
identifying hazards. And that's
I
what I
have a
want
feeling
there.
it's gonna be that for 2027 for you too, James.
And it was in 2025 and 2024 and 2023 and so on and so forth, right? So
Right.
if we think about hazards, and the only time we think about hazards from an identification standpoint is when we get to the job site, we're missing a lot of opportunities. And sort of the segue into this today, criminal act in the
So
workplace.
let so let's talk about this. I brought this up to you. I think I might have sent it to you in a text when it happened. But for those of you that haven't heard, I probably very few of you haven't heard that a young woman welder at a mechanical a large processing plant of some sort, early in her career, 20 years old, um, had been having some problems with a coworker, and unfortunately, the coworker uh, came by with actually her own tool and committed homicide. And the young lady died from the wounds. So homicide in the workplace. And I looked this up, James, because there's over 5,000 deaths in the workplace, and it said of those 5,000 deaths, there are about 18 of them that are worker on worker homicides a year. That to me, that's actually pretty high. A worker on
Right,
worker homicide,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely. Go
that's
ahead.
not shootings. That's other forms of homicide. So I feel like that's pretty high, and I think it's worth us talking about.
Well, this incident, the my takeaway from this incident was it was no doubt premeditated. Uh, the suspect, 40-year-old male, evidently had workplace conflicts with this worker. Um, it's video footage. If you want to see it, you can go on YouTube or the internet search. You can pull up the surveillance video. It shows the suspect uh, leaving his workstation, putting on gloves, getting a sledgehammer, and struck the victim multiple times while she was standing, 4 times after she collapsed. And then afterward, went to another coworker, and this is quote, "I hit her with your hammer. She is gone. She is gone." And he later confessed to the police about his motives for the attack was simply he didn't like her.
He didn't like
He
her.
didn't like her. He didn't like
And James, I also read, and again, you have to be careful what you read, right? Because we don't know the exact facts, but that she had complained to human resources on several occasions about this particular person harassing her. So let's go from the tragedy and talk a little bit about what can we do? What
well,
can we do as risk and safety professionals, as company as a whole? What can we build into our programs or make more robust?
before we get to the corrective actions, the countermeasures, I think we have to address the beginning is why does this happen? Why does workplace violence happen? Why does road rage happen? You know, in this particular incident, it wasn't a heat of the moment reaction. This was premeditated. And that raises a lot of tough questions. Your point about it being reported to HR multiple times. Um, what drives someone to plan such violence? Certainly, we want no violence in the workplace, but heat of the moment violence, uh, not understandable, but you can see a justification there, if you will. What some type of precursor event. Here, someone is planning such violence, and what research has shown is these triggers often come from unresolved interpersonal conflict, unresolved interpersonal conflict, and a lot of times as managers, as supervisors, as leaders, we're like, they'll figure it out. They'll figure it out. Mental health struggles, stress in the workplace, and there is a tremendous amount of organizational stressors. But here's the challenge. You've got to get beyond just ignoring these warning signs. And as safety professionals, we're trained to look for physical hazards. And sometimes these physical hazards are masqueraded in mental health issues that become physical hazards. This certainly became a physical hazard for this young lady. She's no longer with us. She's beaten to death in the workplace. So, what's the warning signs? And did we ignore those warning signs? I don't know
Well,
the
I mean,
specifics of this
if you
incident,
think
but
about somebody going to human resource for 5 times, I think that that's probably some indication that they weren't working it out on their own, right? So, when I look at that, I think the company, um, like I said, the company needs to start thinking about how they deal with these incidents and how they what are their plans for
right.
1, 2, 3 times. Are they working this out? Are they assessing? Are they sending supervisors out into the workplace to assess fit to work? Mentally fit to work, physically. Is there something going on that shouldn't be going on? Um, so you know,
Well,
I agree
there are a
with you
lot of
there.
red flags. Hindsight's always 2020, but there seems to have been a lot of red flags. And so I approach workplace violence like we do any other hazard in the workplace, right? We need some type of system organizationally to address this. So how do we prevent these things from happening? Well, first we need to figure out what the threats are. There are certain symptoms that come out in all these instances. People um, that are fixated, if you will, on grievances or demonstrate in the workplace growing, escalating um, displays of hostility. Those are red flags,
Right.
and they should be flagged, right? And we need a system as an organization to catch this early. So here's some suggestions I think of what companies can do. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Okay.
Um, w- you could develop, even in a small company, a trained group of individuals to form like a threat assessment team, a team approach. What's your thoughts on a team approach to identifying uh, workplace violence hazards?
Well, I mean, I think it should be on our risk register, right? I like to talk about risk registers, and if we're talking about those type of things, you can either, if you've got a big enough workplace, have a threat assessment team, if that's appropriate, or in a smaller workplace that can be worked through um, when you work through your risk register, or it can be put on a standing meeting. You meet every week or every couple weeks. Are there problems? That we should be addressing? Is HR putting their 2 cents in? Are supervisors talking about difficulties within their work teams, people that need to be switched or moved around or maybe things that need to be addressed? So, you know, I I think in a bigger company, a threat assessment team is certainly appropriate. Certainly
And
appropriate.
and members of frontline leadership, senior management, HR, obviously safety, and there's rather than just getting this group of people together, there needs to be an investment on training this group to evaluate risks. Okay. They need to be trained to evaluate what the risk is. And in this particular risk assessment, the risk or this scenario, the risk was internal. It was coworker on
Right.
coworker violence. Sometimes it's external. If you look at the workplace violence requirements in California, for example, Cal OSHA requires you to conduct a workplace violence hazard assessment. You know, that can include we're in a neighborhood, we don't have proper security, fencing, we've
Yep.
got multiple points of access, things of that nature, security cameras. What is our threat assessment? What's the risk to our workers? If you work
Right.
retail, obviously you have a very high risk because you're dealing with the public. So I think each group's got to come up with its own depth of training that individuals in this group need. But there's a lot of places you can go and get training to develop a threat assessment team. And
Yeah.
yes, it's probably
So
going to cost some money, but you know what else costs money, Doc? That lawsuit's fixing to get filed.
well, lawsuit and the loss of life, right? I mean, it's not really. I mean, it is about money, right? But it is about loss of life, right? So I think that that should be the primary focus.
It
One of
is
the
for the
courses that I
person and
used to
her
teach.
family and her friends and for the people that work there, no doubt that loss of life. I don't diminish loss of life for the person that got killed. That's horrible. But when we're looking at budgets and people always say, well, we don't have the money for this, we don't have the money for that. If you have an incident, you're going to be spending money. That's my point, regardless of looking at it as a budgetary item, right? No
Right.
amount of money this person back to their family. Period.
So one of the
Um,
courses that I used to teach,
uh,
had a module in it about prevention through design in the workplace, talking about the things like you were talking about security cameras, but also how your workplace is set up, right? When you talk about external threats, right? When we talk about people coming in and doing shootings or you know, angry coworker coming back after they've been fired, whatever, setting up your workplace design internally, right? Such that workers can hide, get away, egress the building, make sure that there's prevention for attackers to get through, right? It's a whole prevention through design of your workplace system, right? How do you move about the building? How can somebody get past security? How can
yeah,
they,
absolutely. And that I think there's resources probably with local law enforcement that can help you with that. That's certainly not something I've been trained on as a safety professional. Maybe you've been trained on your former law enforcement and that maybe that's part of your background. But I'm smart enough to know when I don't know, right?
right,
So if we're looking for a threat assessment team internally, that's a certain amount of training because we're looking inward to our workforce and at risk behaviors, things of that nature.
right,
External threats, you may have to bring in a security expert that can help assist with that. So if
right.
you're a small business, right? In your opinion, how can this be accomplished without a huge budget?
I mean, I honestly, I think there are resources out there that you can rely upon from the internet or from texts, articles, etc. Right? You can do some research, and a small team of people who are motivated to take a look at their workplace and the hazards that may come up or the conditions that may promote these type of activities that they can actually put their heads together and do it. I mean, I'm a big fan of people have knowledge. You just have to empower them to make decisions.
Well, let's talk about empowerment here because this is another aspect is there is a psychological safety component to this. Anonymous reporting channels where people, employees feel safe to speak up,
Right.
and support others in their complaint. We don't know all the facts related to this, so not speaking specifically related to this incident. Don't know what went on with this person in HR. The reporting doesn't sound good, but regardless, all companies need some type of an anonymous reporting channel to get issues to management about what is going on in the workplace, so it can be investigated. That it
Well,
can.
employers need to take it seriously, right? I mean, you and I work in some some pretty tough professions, right? Our
Right.
consulting businesses are oil and gas and construction for the most part. And in those businesses, it's get her done mentality for the most part. And, the kind of sometimes an old boy network where, you take a certain amount of teasing and needling and etc. Um, but in today's workplace, it's a little bit different. The generations are a little bit different. There's sensitivity things and we really do need to take into account how people feel.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But being able to get the information that we got a problem from the front line to people who can solve that problem is paramount, I think,
Right.
in preventing these
Agreed.
type of incidences. I like to say this in my organization. People call me all the time, and I'm like, "Look, man, I'm just the CEO. We got to call somebody that knows exactly what's going on. That's not me." The higher up you go, the more detached you get from the front line, and that's not even true of safety professionals. More detached you get from the day-to-day workforce, the less you really know what's going on in your organization, right? And
Right.
everybody's on their best behavior when the CEO comes around or the superintendent comes around, et cetera. We need a way for people to get issues addressed and feel safe addressing those issues with some level of uh, anonymity, you know?
Yep.
And whether that's email, whether that's, text, or they'll drop it in the box or slip it under the door, whatever works for your organization, employees must feel safe to speak up. The other component of this I want to get your thoughts on because we talk about this in every conference I go to is mental health support. We all recognize we need mental health support. We recognize we need counseling and stress management programs, but beyond just saying that, where can we go to get that actually implemented in medium-sized businesses?
So I'm gonna jump back a little bit because the drop it in the box and the anonymity is a great thing, but it has to be part of a system. Okay, so if you're gonna drop it in the box and nobody looks at it for a week, that's not a good system, right? If you're gonna email human resources and they're gonna put a check mark somewhere, that's not a good system, right? There has to be a process if you're gonna have a way that employees can make reports or complaint or a concern about a coworker on a mental health issue, right? That it's going to be number 1, it's going to be seen in an expeditious manner and that it's going to be taken seriously and run through proper channels. Okay? And that includes mental health support, right? We talk a lot about our employee assistance plans, right? We have an employee
Right.
assistance plan. I can't tell you how many times that I've been onboarded with a company and they tell you about the employee assistance plan. And I hesitate to say that very few people use the employee assistance plan, right? So maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there needs to be another avenue to get people help or to at least say to somebody, we want you to get help.
Well, most of the employee assistance programs I know of focus heavily on drug and alcohol,
Right,
almost exclusively on drug and alcohol. Um, Having counseling, there's still a stigma to it. There's still a stigma to it. So making it part of the system rather than saying, here's a number you can call. If workplace stress is causing people to act out violently, maybe that's something we need to recognize as a hazard and see how we can de stress the workplace, right? As part of a control, if you will, in safety parlance, is a administrative control. So
right,
I'd just like to see us as companies as we're looking at addressing these workplace violence issues, particularly related to coworker violence. Uh, we've all seen people blow up, get into arguments. Maybe someone's seen people actually come to blows or have a physical altercation in the workplace. If it's related to stress, let's stop talking about we need mental health programs and actually finding mental health support that doesn't always depend upon, or let me put it this way, that moves beyond here's a number in your employee handbook. Please call it if you feel like you need counseling or stress. Because
right,
if that would work, we wouldn't have all these instances. It's not working.
right,
Right?
right.
It's not working. So, to address generational changes, whatever it is, everybody, regardless of whatever generation they're from, needs to feel safe in their workplace. and that's a key component of psychological safety.
So
Um,
I also want to add in there, a lot of times as I see in construction, right, that we need to educate our supervisors, our foremen, our superintendents, and we even need to educate coworkers, right, on signs, symptoms, how to handle conflicts, right. Um,
Absolutely.
we have all these mandatory things that we need to train on, and it may not be mandatory only in like California where they have a workplace violence. Uh, Standard, or someplace in Connecticut where sexual harassment and harassment in the workplace is an actual training requirement, right, in workplaces. In other cases, we need to be providing this to our supervisors and to our workers so that they know how to
Well,
diffuse a
and
conflict.
what we don't. How do people get made a supervisor? Okay? This has been a
They do
problem
good work,
in
maybe.
the
I don't
past.
know.
They're usually pretty good workers, and they we have a supervisor, and then John retires or Susan gets promoted, and they leave. And then how do we pick the next supervisor? We just take a person, say, we think you're gonna be a good supervisor, and we put them out there, and if they internally have the skills necessary to do it, it's great. If not, 3 months from now, we're saying that guy's terrible as a supervisor because
Right.
we haven't given them any training or support on how to lead people. And part of that training needs to be conflict resolution training. Supervisors, particularly in the foreman role, in my opinion, they're the ones at the front lines. Everybody needs it, but they're the ones at the front lines that need to know how to de-escalate tensions, and that doesn't come with just innate abilities. It needs to be trained. If you want a good outcome, you need to train your supervisors, your managers on how to de-escalate tensions through some type of conflict resolution training.
And I would add with that, James, I think we also need to put expectations in there on what you're supposed to do with that training. I see a lot of people that they may get the conflict resolution training. They may get all the supervisor support that they need, but they're just not the right person to actually put that into
Then they don't
effect,
need to be a supervisor.
right? They don't really want to do it. Well, honestly,
They
that's
don't need to
part
be
of
a
the job.
supervisor.
I understand, but that's part of the job, and I think that we need to start
If they
seeing that as
cannot
part of
do
the
the
job.
essential functions of the job, they don't need to be in leadership. They may be a great worker, okay? But if you don't have the skills necessary and we can't train you and impart the skills necessary into you and you just don't wanna do it, you're hands off, how can you be responsible for other people?
And we have to have those hard conversations with them about that.
So I think what typically happens though is we expect people just to show up at work and be supervisors and have these skill sets without training them on how to handle time management, conflict resolution, delegation,
Right.
project planning. We just expect people to show up with those skill sets. And it's something that's not innate in all of us. It needs to be trained. You need to coach people on it. You need to make an investment in your leaders. And if they don't want to do it, they have a system. Well, people gonna do what they gonna do.
I
I
was
can't.
just gonna
Well,
you got that from me today,
that's
James, right?
right.
Because I heard that
Then,
on the site today. People are
then
gonna
you
do what
know,
people are gonna do.
my first
And
question in that is, okay, did we train you that that's not the right mentality to have? If we have, and we've taught you and we've coached you, and you still have that mentality, you don't need to be in that role
yep, agreed, agreed.
because that's
So what
part
else
of.
do you have on your list there, James?
Well, the other thing, this kind of goes beyond worker on worker violence to the greater emergency response plan's expectations. You would not believe the number of companies that I assess that their emergency action plan has not been looked at in years. It only
Yep,
deals with things like fire, and no one has ever done any type of drill.
or threat assessment, or
You know,
annual threat
or
assessment,
or how
right?
how how they implement it. if we have a threat assessment, we know these are the threats and the threat shows up, but we don't know what to do to respond to the threat. And, it's like right now, the schools get it. And it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that my grandchild, who is in first grade, has to learn to hide and have active shooter drills in his elementary school.
Yeah.
It,
The
it,
worst
it
we
breaks
had,
my
James,
heart
if
and it
you
makes
remember
me
back,
angry.
was going in the hallway and putting our heads down for a tornado, and
Yeah,
now we've got active shooter drills. But,
right.
I
But
think
they're
that's a
doing
good
that at
thing, right?
school.
Our schools have learned,
Our
or
schools
they're
have
learning,
learned, but I don't see many companies that have these. And I'm not
right?
talking about just active shooter drills. I'm talking about anything related to emergency response. You do not rise to the occasion in the event of an emergency. You
You rise to your
always
level of training.
100% descend to your level of training.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we're sort of getting over here toward the end of the year and we're looking at things to do for 2026, activate your emergency response plan under
Talk
different
about it.
scenarios. Then critique it. Put in corrective actions, get together afterward, talk to the participants. What worked right? What worked wrong? Didn't work well? How can we improve? Because all of this, in the event of a tragedy, is going to be examined and we're going to
Right,
talk about it, right? So let's try to prevent tragedies from happening. But if they do happen, let's have a plan of action. And I don't know how you can do it without actually drilling it
right.
because paper safety is not real safety.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, okay? Organizational culture. How do you believe that plays a role as it relates to workplace violence prevention?
Well, I mean, I think it wraps into everything we've just talked about, James, right? A culture has to do with all these different components, right? And if you're lacking all the components that we talked about, or some of the components, or most of the components, then it's really hard to have a culture that says this is an important thing. Stress is an important thing. Mental health is an important thing. Conflict resolution is an important thing. It has to come from the top, right? I know we say that a lot and say it's gotta come from the top, but it has to pervade everything we do, and that means taking all of these different steps to come to a culture where it's on the top of our mind, that we're drilling, we're planning, we're noticing, we're training, we're doing all the things that we need to do in order to try to prevent. You can't prevent everything, right? We know that, right? Risk cannot be 0, but we can try. And I think that's what I want to come out of this episode is that, there probably could have been, coulda, shoulda, woulda. It was a tremendous tragedy in the workplace. But there are things that we can learn, and there are things that you can start to think about in your own workplaces.
I think
So,
of it just like any other hazard. We begin with a policy. What's our policy? If you have a zero tolerance policy, then you need to communicate that a policy. You need to train on that policy. Your threat assessment team needs to view the threats in the workplace based on that policy. And then once you have a policy in place and you say zero tolerance, it needs to be zero tolerance, right?
right, right.
If you've got good, you talked a little bit about good reporting and communication. I think you were excellent in bringing up, clear escalation protocols where we're getting the right people involved. We're taking action on these concerns because lives depend on it,
Right.
right? Employee
Agreed.
support we talked about, like mental health counseling, conflict resolution training, equipping supervisors with the tools necessary to go out there and do their job. And then, you know, behavioral indicators could be part of that training. Are workers exhibiting
Leadership.
these type of behaviors that indicate that there's escalating problem? This guy did not just wake up on Tuesday and come to work and decide to beat his coworker to death. It built up to this,
Right.
okay? And then, like you talked about leadership commitment, um, demonstrating the total organizational culture. Now, that's kind of a downer episode, I think. Nobody wants to talk about that kind of stuff here in the holidays. But look, somebody's loved one's not going to be there for Christmas, not going to be there
Right.
for Thanksgiving,
Let's
right?
make sure that it's not your workplace that this happens to next, right? Because it will happen again. And so, please take some of these tips. If you have other tips that you think people should include in their programs to create the culture around this, to de-stress, to de-escalate, to conflict resolution, etc., go ahead, drop them in the comments for this episode. Reach out to us on LinkedIn, send us an email. Let us know, right? Because we're all about sharing what we think, but our listeners have some pretty good ideas too. So please share them with us. And James, how can they get a hold of us?
Hey, we're there on LinkedIn, email. You can follow us over on Veriforce's YouTube channel. We're also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, just about everywhere you get at your podcast. Uh, you're going to find the risk matrix. We'd love to hear from you. If you learned anything today, we'd like you to like and subscribe. If something we said today you enjoyed and it added to your toolbox for bringing workers home safe from hazardous jobs, like and subscribe. If you love Alabama football, Coach Bryant and Nick Saban want you to like and subscribe. And if you don't, they still want you to do it. Roll Tide, right?
Roll Tide. So thanks a lot for listening, and happy holidays to everybody. We got another episode coming up next week. Before Christmas, we're going to roll through some of the things that have gone on in 2025, a little bit of a look ahead to 2026, but things that we kind of predicted for 2025 and how those turned out. So thanks again for listening and for bringing workers home safe from high hazard jobs. And James,
Roll Tide out.